The opinions and views expressed in this podcast do not reflect the views of HTT Media Group. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello, lovelies, and thanks again for tuning in to Listen Closely. If you haven't already, please follow me on Facebook, where I'll be posting all things related to the topics of each episode, as well as merchandise and many other different things. So without further ado, please sit back, relax, and listen closely.
Hello, lovelies. So today we're going to be talking about an area that is not too terribly far. How far would you say it's?
I'd say probably about 45 minutes.
45?
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a way, but not really. I mean, if you've been in this area, you've definitely gone to this place, but you may not have heard all the different stories. And of course, I'm talking about Galveston. And the reason we're actually going this weekend is for our anniversary that just recently passed up.
Right. Happy anniversary, by the way.
Thank you. Happy anniversary to you.
I love you.
Anyways, so that's why we're actually going to Galveston. And while there, I thought, why not talk about some of the things that we talk about on this show. And Galveston is full of very different stories. You can just look up Galveston, like, ghosts, or Galveston tragedy, Galveston true crime, Galveston, like, any kind of, like, wording you can look up, and you're bound to find something.
Right.
So, for this episode, we're actually going to be talking about, and we'll hit Galveston a bunch, because there's so much there. But on this one, we're going to be talking about the Great Storm of the 1900s. Okay. And one story in particular, because there are so many off of that one. But we're going to be talking about one in particular. So to give a little bit of background, all of us have heard of this great storm. Being in the Gulf Coast region, we all face hurricanes every year. Right. And it's always a huge problem that we face. Like Midwest has tornadoes and the tornado alley.
Then California ways you got
your
earthquakes
fires
and fires.
Yeah. And the northern
ice.
Yeah, ice.
Yeah.
And then they had that one hurricane ice tornado thing that was really weird.
It
was
super weird.
They were not prepared for that at all.
Right.
Because they know ice, they don't know hurricanes, and combining the two was just crazy.
But this hurricane you're talking about is like one of the most historical hurricanes of all time.
Yes, because it is one of the deadliest Atlantic hurricanes to ever come and make landfall. Right. And this particular one happened it made landfall September 8th, 1900, which is why it's known as the Great Storm of 1900. It's just known as the Great Storm because at that time they did not have the naming system in place as we do now. So like we all know, Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Rita, Hurricane Ike, Gustav, we can go on and on. Back in that day, they did not have the naming system in place, so there was no names. It's just the Great Storm and they call it the Great Storm of 1900. Obviously, it wasn't the only one, but it is the one. Like, it is the big one. So that's why it's one of the only ones that's talked about during that time period.
I mean, it literally almost wiped Galveston off the map.
Yes. The fatalities were, so it varies. Some are saying the lower end of 6,000, and some are saying the upper ends of 12,000. Right. And the reason you have such a varying number is because they still don't know. Right. There was never a complete list of dead ever made. Oh, wow. So they honestly don't know. Yeah. But most people kind of agree that it's around 8,000. Okay. Is about where most historians kind of agree with it. But again, we don't know. Right. This great storm was a Category 4 with wind speeds in the upper 135. And some say it was higher when it made landfall. Wow. Again, being that time period, they didn't have the measuring tools that we have today. And the reason this storm was such a horrendous one is because it went so wrong. The way they had to do it during that time was they had to go through Washington.
Right.
So Washington just got it completely wrong. Said it's fine. It's not going to be that bad. Cuba just got hit with it. They're like, no, y'all need to prepare. Like, it's going to be bad. Washington at the time didn't like Cuba.
Right.
So they're like, yeah, you know, they're just, you know, they're them.
Yeah.
We don't want to talk about them.
Right.
Like, it's not going to be that bad. The sun's shining. It's a beautiful day. As long as the sun is shining and you got clear skies, it'll be fine. Well, unfortunately, a lot of lives were lost. And when they finally did realize what happened, it was much too late.
Yeah.
So, the one story we're going to pull out of this tragedy is from the St. Mary's Orphans Asylum. And when I say asylum, I don't mean, you know, like the asylums we think of, you know, like the American Horror Story Asylum with, you know, the people locked up for mental health issues and stuff like that. That's not the asylum we're talking about. So in this time, we are talking about an orphanage.
Okay.
That I'm not too sure why they said asylum on the title. That's just what it was called. So the Sisters of Charity came to Galveston in 1866 by order of the French Catholic Bishop Claude M. Dubois to care for the sick and orphaned due to the yellow fever epidemic that was happening at that time. So in 1867, the Catholic hospital was erected, shall I say. And it was actually one of the first Catholic hospitals in this area.
Okay.
So they were there to, you know, care for the sick, especially with that yellow fever, which we talked about in previous episodes, that it was just, you know, it was devastating this area.
Right.
Let alone, you know, the storms and hurricanes that they have to deal with, because, like I said, that's an ongoing thing, like in this area. So they're dealing with that, but on top of that, they're also dealing with yellow fever and that outbreak. Due to yellow fever, many parents passed away,
right,
which left a lot of kids orphaned. So they decided to open up an orphanage for those yellow fever children victims.
Right.
So they first originally had the orphanage in the hospital, like within the hospital building. But obviously they started to grow so much, and that's kind of a danger zone because you're basically exposing these children to yellow fever. And so they got some land that was a little bit west, which is now going to be 69th and Seawall Boulevard.
Okay.
This is the location now. But in that area, I mean, it's obviously not that, but anyways. So they acquired this land, so they built their orphanage. And that way, it was far enough away from town that they would be safe from the yellow fever, or more safe.
Okay.
So that's what they ended up doing. The land, some are saying it was donated, some saying it was bought. It could have been bought as a donation for like a really small price. I mean, I saw conflicting things on whether it was donated or bought. I'm not too sure. Being that it is a church, it could very well have been donated or, like I said, bought at a very, very low price to help these people out. So the sisters they had one building. It was the boys' building, the boys' dormitory, but then they, had to add on for the women and the girls, so they added on. At the time of 1900, there was about 90 children, or to 100 children. Again, we're not too sure how many exactly. And then there were nuns that were both in the orphanage, and then they also were some in the hospital. So on the day of September 8th, 1900, it's actually kind of creepy. So one of the sisters was in town. So she was on the orphanage, she was in town, she was getting some supplies, just small little things here and there, and collecting food. And one of the mothers, Mother Gabriel, who is the assistant superior at St. Mary's Infirmary, which is the hospital, told her, you need to stay here. Like, don't go back, stay here, we'll stay here. And the sister said, no, it's okay. I've got to go back with these supplies and be there for the children. So she left and went back. So the day was pretty calm. As we know here in this area, the day of the storm, it can be beautiful and sunny and great as the storm's approaching. So it was, pretty calm. The waves were starting to pick up and stuff, whatever. Like, it was all right, though. So they're like, yeah, we'll be fine. But then evening fell. And nothing is scarier than an evening storm because you honestly can't see what's hitting you. But it wasn't no evening storm. So when it started to slowly come inland, the wind started picking up and it started getting crazy, as most storms do. So the sisters at the orphanage decided to move all the children from all the dorms, gather them up, and bring them into the girls' dormitory because it was the newest building. So they figured it would...
More structurally sound.
Right.
Yeah.
It would stand a lot easier.
Right.
So they went there, and as they were there, to calm the children, because obviously I'm a child, I'm freaking out because I'm hearing things that, things slamming on the, on the building, the wind's whipping up like crazy, and you got the lightning and thunder and hard rain and things you probably have never heard, buildings starting to kind of creak and crack in ways you've never heard. So to get the kids to calm down, they sang a French hymn called The Queen of the Waves, which we will play that so that you can hear it. And so it was kind of it's a French fisherman's song, basically asking and praying for peaceful waters and safety. So they sang that song along with probably other hymnals, but that's the one that people know because of this. And so the boys' dormitory, which was the older one and they weren't in, did end up collapsing and, washed away. So that one ended up collapsing, and they heard it collapsing, and obviously the rising water, so they, the water's coming up, so they decided, okay, we'll go up to the next level. So they went up to the next level. And then they're still trying to calm the children down. They're still trying to figure out what's happening. And remember, this is all in the orphanage, not the infirmary. The infirmary, they were trying to help survivors as best they could, trying to pull people into the building and take care of their own. But as far as I could see, that they were basically okay. This is the orphanage I'm talking about. Okay. So the orphanage, boys' dormitory is gone, trying to calm down these screaming kids who don't really understand what's going on. So they decided, the nuns that were in there, that, okay, look, we need to take care of our children. Right. Because they've already lost everything. We're going to make sure that, they're fine. Mm-hmm. So they got the idea to go down, get some clothesline rope, and tie themselves together. So for every one nun, there was about 6 to 8 children tied to them. Because they felt, if we did this, we would not lose them. They would be with us always. And in fact, one sister held 2 children because she said they were too young to be actually tied up because they probably wouldn't understand. So she held on to the children and promised them, I will not let you go. Oh, wow. So, this one's really a tough story.
And we'll play the song.
Yes.
At the end of the show.
So the storm obviously gets so much worse. Right. And eventually, in the orphanage, the roof ends up collapsing. Mm-hmm. So those who were in the orphanage, in that girl's dormitory, they either perished right when the roof collapsed, or the water had then swept them up. There's not, again, back in that day, they didn't really do autopsies, and it was a tragedy, so we're not too sure exactly what killed them. If you've seen nuns, you know that the habits and clothes that they wear are very, very, very thick cloth. Right. And unfortunately, what they thought was the right thing to do of tying the children to them might have been actually counterproductive, because those habits and clothes were so heavy, once wet, they possibly had drowned themselves and the children.
Yeah, got over them and suffocated them. Right. Yeah.
But the good news is there were 3 boys that survived.
Really?
They found, they were in a tree. Okay. They ended up clinging onto a tree the entire night together, all of them in the same tree. So that's kind of amazing that they stuck together. And they kind of waited until the water receded.
So were they originally with the nuns and they just got swept up in, or were they just three that decided, no, we're not going to be with them, we're going to go get in the tree?
So there was one story that said that some of the children decided to go on top of the roof, but I don't see the nuns saying, yeah, go on top of the roof with things flying around.
Yeah.
Like, I don't see that. So I'm not sure how these boys, I think there are accounts on the online that say how exactly, and they have their own accounts because they obviously survived.
Right.
They went, after their survival, they went to the infirmary because they know where it's at, obviously, and they told their story. And one of the boys says, yeah, actually, I remember one of the sisters holding on to two children and saying, I'm not going to let you go. I promise you, I will not let you go. So he remembers that nun saying this. And they said, yeah, we remember this. We remember that the children were getting so frightened, so to calm them down, they were trying to sing and, kind of raise the spirits. And that's how we got the account of them singing that hymnal, which is the Queen of the Waves. Like all tragedies, though, 10 sisters and 90 children were confirmed to have passed away from this orphanage with those 3 survivors. And because this was a huge tragedy for Galveston, obviously they were not the only ones. Like I said, somewhere from 6,000 to 12,000 perished that night. When the water did recede and people were able to go out, obviously there was so much damage and everything that bodies were actually buried where they were found. So, because, what can you do at this point? Buildings are gone. You're trying to make sense of everything and that just happened and what went wrong, and you're worried about your own relatives and your own life and just everything. And in fact, so when the bodies were found, the children were still found attached by rope to the nuns. And one of
this whole story is just
it's extremely sad. And it's crazy to think because we still deal with these storms.
Yeah.
And we still, even with our advanced equipment, we're still not fully prepared for them. With Katrina, the evacuation, and Ike, the evacuation system just wasn't there. We knew well in advance, hey, this might be a bad storm.
Right.
But we just did not, we still don't have the equipment in place. How do you move so many people out of such a small area in such a small time?
Right.
In
Especially
an orderly
people
fashion.
who thought nothing was going to happen.
Yeah.
Washington told them.
Washington told them. There was one man, and I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to get it completely wrong, but there was one man in Galveston who was doing some weather, and he kind of started to sense something was happening. And he said, hey, we should probably take this serious. But of course, Washington said, no, it's fine.
Yeah.
So he basically got shut out. So if they would have listened to him, a lot more probably would have been saved.
Yeah.
But by the time people actually started to listen to, hey, okay, maybe he might be a little right, and as a precaution I should do something, it was obviously way too late. And they don't have the means to travel like we do now. They can't just hop in a car and, drive.
Right.
That's just not something that they do. So, going back to the unfortunate bodies that were found, 2 sisters were found along the beach. And one of the sisters was found holding 2 children. So she kept her promise and held them to the very end.
Wow. Which
is both amazing and so tragic at the same time. So we talk about this story to get into the more what we talk about thing, which is the ghost of all of them that have perished.
Right.
Some paranormal researchers believe that moving water actually helps ghosts manifest because of the kinetic energy.
Correct.
So Galveston being an island, most people believe this is why they have such a high paranormal.
Like a spike in paranormal activity.
A spike.
Yeah.
Like everywhere you turn, apparently is some kind of a ghost thing. So this area, which is the 69th and Seawald Boulevard, is actually now a Walmart.
Yeah.
So if you go now, you're not going to see the orphanage.
Right.
The part of the building did still stand at that time, but obviously they demolished it. And they actually rebuilt at a time, and it was actually functioning until, I believe, 1967.
Okay.
Is when they finally closed down the orphanage. But
right.
it did get rebuilt. But now there's just a Walmart. And that Walmart is actually said to be haunted.
Oh, wow.
Some reports are saying that not just in the kids aisle or the toys aisle, but throughout the store, you'll hear children laughing and running throughout the aisles, knocking stuff down. And some employees say it's just kind of really eerie to work, especially at night or like right before a storm.
Yeah.
They say right before a storm, the activity kind of spikes up a little bit.
I can imagine.
But it's not just that one location of like Walmart. The entire island has so many ghost stories. And in fact, Hotel Galvez, which is like the haunted hotel there, with so many different stories, they even attribute some of their ghosts to the orphanage. And the children are heard running up and down the hallways. Yeah. And they believe that so many different areas have these children running around and, playing because the bodies were so scattered. So they attribute to half of it to, the children are just basically haunting where their bodies were. And some of it is, maybe they came back to places they knew. Right. Or, there's different accounts on it. The state of Texas actually put a Texas historical marker up, though. Okay. So in September 8th, 1994, the Texas Historical Society placed the marker on the site of the orphanage. So, like, across the street from the Walmart, you can find the little marker. Okay. And actually, one of the cool things is I told you that three boys survived. Right. 2 descendants of those survivors returned to participate in the the ceremony of placing that marker. Yeah. And the cool/eerie side of that is when placing that marker that day, Queen of the Waves was sung as a testament to, the bravery of those nuns trying their best to keep those children safe. And, especially like that one nun who promised, I will not let you go. Right. Found with those 2 children still with her. And actually, the amazing part of this story is the tradition continues. So every September 8th, by the Sisters of Charity of the Incarnate World, all around the world, sing Queen of the Waves in honor of those brave women and the children that perished. Man. So, it's not just the Galveston, it's everybody, or most of them. Right. Those Sisters of the Charity sing on September 8th every year, the Queen of the Waves. And if you listen to the song, which, like I said, we're going to play it in this somewhere, whether the end, beginning, middle, we're going to play it so you can hear it in its entirety. It's so creepy because the one that I found, which is off of the one of the Galveston sites, let me see real quick. But yeah, it has children singing in it too, and it adds to the creepiness factor of it. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know what's your take on it.
So first off, obviously, from what I've heard, it was a terrible tragedy. And it, the one thing that hits me is the one nun that doesn't let go of the 2 babies. And they actually, like you said, they find her on the beach with these 2 babies in her arms. Now, I'm probably going to get pretty freaked out because, so if y'all don't know this, but when I come to the studio as the producer, I know nothing about what she's about to talk about.
Yeah, we kind of put an end to that so that way you...
Yeah, so I don't tell anybody because I like to talk.
Well, you don't tell anybody, and we can get your honest opinion.
Right.
Firsthand, never hearing this story before. I mean, you've heard, obviously, of the storm.
Now, and I've heard that Galveston is an extremely haunted place, but I don't know individual stories about why it's haunted like this. So, as being a believer in the unseen and stuff like that, this, I'm gonna be honest, this terrifies me. Like it, so I don't like ghosts at all. Like as far as freaking out, that kind of thing. I definitely don't like ghost children. Like that's something that I just don't do. So, it was a horrible thing, and I think that kind of mad at Washington right now, but
yeah. So because of the storm, and how devastating it was to Galveston, they actually changed the game.
Did they?
So obviously, unfortunately, our government is kind of the retroactive instead of the...
Well, we're very reactive. We're not very proactive.
Reactive. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Reactive instead of proactive.
Right.
So after the storm, they're like, oops, we made a boo-boo.
Yeah.
Yeah, you made a huge boo-boo.
Right.
So after the storm, they kind of opened up, reevaluated, and changed how they go about with these storms. And obviously, they still didn't get it right. And we didn't start naming storms, like I said, I believe until about I don't remember what I said, 30s. Oh, I'm gonna lie if I say it now. I had it and then I lost it. But like this storm is what changed everything. And to get in perspective, the storm surge, which is, I mean, we know a storm surge, but do you know what storm surge is?
Yeah.
Okay, what's storm surge?
Like it is the after effect, like the water that actually,
Yeah, I just want to make sure. Yeah. So for those who are maybe up north and don't realize what storm surge is, so like, when a regular rainstorm happens, they'll say, okay, you'll get an inch or 3 inches of rain accumulated onto the surface, onto the ground.
Right.
Storm surge is basically that, but it's no longer inches, it's feet.
Right.
It's how much the water has come in.
Right.
And especially with Galveston being that island right off of the coast, you can imagine, like, the amount of water that had got dumped onto them. And they were, like, right there. So the storm surge, they believe, again, they're not 100% sure because almost everything was so devastated. But they believe the storm surge was anywhere from 12 to 15 feet.
Wow.
At its highest.
And that's saying something, because we've seen storms, we've seen hurricanes in Galveston since then.
Yes.
And it's, they've been bad, but when they say, and I've seen really bad hurricanes in Galveston, and when they say that none of them compared to the storm of 1900, like, that's saying something. Like, that's, man, I don't, it's not a lot of times where my wife leaves me speechless about one of her stories. But, guys, I'm going to tell you right now, this one has left me speechless. I don't even know what to say. I just feel bad for the kids and the nuns and stuff. And
just to give it a little bit more perspective, it is said that Galveston lost nearly a third of its inhabitants that day.
Oh, wow.
Or that evening when everything was done. And then you also have to remember, so I mentioned the hospital that they had.
Right.
And I said that they were combating yellow fever.
Right.
Well, guess what? Right after the storm, it's still there.
Yeah.
But at that point, you're no longer thinking, oh, we got to keep them quarantined.
Right.
Or anything. It's, hey, we've got to come together. We've got to find the living, help the ones that needed help.
Right.
So the yellow fever epidemic unfortunately got so much worse after the storm because of, just trying to find everybody and caring for the sick and getting those able-bodied people to come out and help clean. And, like, this storm was felt for months. Honestly, probably years.
Yeah, I would say,
I mean, because you have to completely rebuild everything. The silver lining of this is Galveston did rebuild.
Right.
And obviously, it is there today. I mean, it has its seawall. You would think, okay, because a lot of people think this, Galveston has that seawall, which is, I don't know how many feet. You can look that up really fast for me. But it's a pretty good amount of feet that they've built up. And that still doesn't help them. I mean, I have some older pictures of when Ike happened.
So the Galveston seawall is 17 feet high, and it is 10 miles long.
And it still doesn't help today.
Yeah.
Because when Ike happened, we went, me and my family, it was actually me, my mom, my dad, went to Galveston a couple months later. And I mean, they were still obviously damaged from Ike. But we went. There was actually a line on the building, and I want to see if it's still there. I'm going to have to ask exactly where it was, but there was a line on the building that said Ike. And it was actually how high the storm surge went up. And my dad, being 6 foot, I think like 6'2" actually, raised his hand up, was standing straight, raised his hand up, and was still underneath that line. And that's Ike.
Yeah.
Like, recently.
So I looked it up. It took Galveston, after the hurricane of 1900, it took them 12 years to rebuild Galveston.
Yeah.
Like
it took a long time. It was felt. And if you think about it, I mean, how many people are going to rush over to Galveston now and be like, hey, I want to live here?
Yeah.
Like, we've seen it with Ike and Gustav and all the other ones. When the hurricane happens, people don't want to come over here anymore. They're like, let me rethink that beach home. Because I don't really want to, I don't want to deal with hurricanes.
And it was weird. So when the hurricane happened, what was the one that leveled all the beach houses and stuff? I believe that was Ike.
That was Ike.
Like, it was weird because, like, when you went to Crystal Beach, like, which is right outside of Galveston, and it's the way we have to go to get to Galveston.
Yeah.
Like, you would see
the Bolivar Peninsula.
Suburbs of nothing but beach houses. And when you drove through after, it was just flat land.
Right.
Like, and imagine
with maybe one or two.
That's this hurricane.
Yeah.
Imagine how horrible 1900 was.
And that's with our improved, shall we say, structures and our knowledge. Because obviously those beach houses, they're on stilts because they're like, okay, we know that there's hurricanes coming, so we'll build them up so it doesn't flood. Back in that day, they didn't really do that. Like, obviously they knew about hurricanes, but they didn't build the buildings up like they do now.
The damage from hurricane, the Great Storm, was $35.4 million.
Right. And that's,
Wow.
Which now you can kind of, like I said, you can put it into perspective of why they just had to bury the bodies where they lie. And in fact, not all the bodies were completely found. They were still finding bodies months later as, the sand was getting washed and buildings were getting cleaned up. And
now let me hit you with this fact real quick. I said that. Let me hit you with another fact. So it was $35 million in 1900. Right now, if it were today, it would be $1.97 billion.
That's yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
So I mean, it was a huge tragedy, not only for the history that was there and the buildings that were lost, but those lives that were lost. And this is just one of the many stories that came from that hurricane. I mean, there are so many others. There's one about a girl named Sarah, which I might talk about next week, since we're kind of on this Galveston hurricane thing. And like I said, there's so many of these stories. I can probably fit about a couple in the next episode.
And it's getting to be summer, so people are
getting to be summer. People are wanting to go to the beach, so you can actually go and visit these places.
Right.
Like, you can go to 69th and Seawall Boulevard right now and see that plaque, kind of, look at it. And there's actually plenty of museums in Galveston that are talking about this storm, so you can definitely go visit those. There's also websites that are dedicated to this storm. There's one that's where I got some of my information called the 1900storm.com, I believe.
Right.
And you can go see that one. I mean, there's so much on this storm right now because it was like it devastated this area. And just to give another small little tidbit on this storm, so it hit Galveston, and then it went all the way up to Iceland. Like, I mean, it dissipated pretty quickly. So, like, it hit as a Category 4, dropped down to a tropical storm.
Right.
But, like, the remnants stayed around all the way to Iceland.
Wow.
Where it finally dissipated, like, completely.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, they didn't get as much as what we got in our area.
Right.
But it, like, that kind of tells you, like, how big of a storm this was. Because this was a huge storm. The last Category 4 storm we had was, I believe, Rita and Katrina.
Correct.
I think Katrina was actually a 5 when it hit.
It
had just barely gotten to a 5. But, like, that kind of puts you into perspective. And, like, say, Katrina, we lost roughly about 1,200 lives on that storm. And, again, that's because we know better, supposedly. Like, you know, we have the equipment there, and, you know, we are talking to different sources. It's not just Washington telling us, hey, this is going to be a good storm, or hey, it's going to be pretty bad, you need to leave. Like, we're talking to, we have the European models and, like, the Cuban models. Like, there's so many different models out there, and that's how they basically get where they're going to figure out where the storm's going, and we still don't get it right.
So both Katrina and Rita were both 5s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that still devastated our areas.
Yeah.
Like, tremendously.
Yeah.
I mean, we can even talk about, what was that one? Harvey.
Yeah.
Harvey also hit the area in Galveston, Beaumont area, and that wasn't really so much as a big storm, but it sat on us. And
right.
That even hurt us. We weren't even prepared for that because it, you know, inland places like where we live became islands where you couldn't, come in.
Yeah, Harvey came in as a 4, but the water.
And it sat. It did not move.
Right.
Like, it sat for days on us. And like I said, we became an island, and it was kind of cool at the time, but at the time it was also kind of scary that we had helicopters coming in to bring us supplies.
Right.
We've never had that before.
The bridge collapsed.
That was a whole new experience for us where we became the island.
Right.
So you can kind of understand, like, we're not even prepared for the hurricanes we're facing today.
Yeah.
With all the advanced technology, imagine how they felt back in 1900 with absolutely no warning, really. They knew it was a storm coming. They didn't really understand how big or how threatening, damaging. And you have some heroes like that sister who held on to those kids. Right. And, you know, the ones in the hospital who are trying to pull bodies out of the water passing by and help them. I mean, you have those people that did, and they tried everything they could to help. And some of them were more fortunate than others, and some of them, unfortunately, perished along with the rest. But that's today's story. We are going to, like I said, we're going to be visiting Galveston. I will be posting photos of the monument that's there for it. I will be posting some photos of possibly some museums that we go to. I'm not entirely sure what we're doing.
Yeah.
But definitely I will post as much information as I can find on this particular story of the orphanage as well as others. Yeah. Like I said, I could probably hit on it a couple times. If you follow me on Facebook or Instagram, you can find all of these things I'm going to be posting at HTT Listen Closely. Or TikTok. I actually have a TikTok now. It's at HTT Listen Closely, where I will be posting any small videos we do or things related to the stories that I'm going to be talking about. As well as I have an email if you want to reach out, and if you have something you want me to talk about, or you know something, you know, little rabbit hole that I can go down, you can email me at httlistenclosely@gmail.com. And if you just love my show so very much, you can go onto Facebook and look at the different merchandise I have.
Yeah. I
do have some shirts available, as well as a cup that I have that I think is pretty cool that glows in the dark.
I mean, it is pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. Like,
even I use it as a nightlight one night.
I mean, it glows in the dark. I mean, whether it's a good nightlight or whether he stubbed his toe, I don't really know. But it glows in the dark. And my merchandise is actually made by Doodlebug Designs here in Silsbee. And you can either reach out to her on Facebook or at www.doodlebugdesignstexas.com.
Yeah.
And get in contact with Miss Beth, and she will help you out on getting all of your merchandise from Listen Closely. If you can think it, she can do it.
Yeah.
So if you want a Listen Closely mask for these epidemic times, she will even do that for you. I can't promise it'll glow in the dark, though, because I don't think it will. But you never know. So that's all the different ways that you can reach me. Or you can, just stop me on the street if you happen to know who I am.
Yeah.
And where I live. You can stop me on the street and be like, hey, I got a story for you.
Yeah.
I've had that happen several times, actually.
Yeah.
From our locals. And I actually really appreciate it.
Yeah. So we're going to end the show by playing the song.
Okay.
So what do you think they should do when they listen or hear this song?
I mean, obviously, you've heard the story. You know what they were going through and, the eeriness and the unknowing. So just kind of reflect on the lives lost, not only of the orphanage, but of the whole city of Galveston, I would say. And just kind of pay your respects and just listen. So that was Queen of the Waves hymnal that was sung and is still sung in remembrance of those victims of the 1900 storm. I just want to quickly say thank you so much for listening to the podcast. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave us 5 stars and subscribe. And always remember to listen closely.